So now it's time to start with the JavaScript part for this particular stopwatch timer application. So for that we need to use this script.js file, and inside of that we need to create a couple of variables. So first we need to create the variables for these three labels, which is the milliseconds, seconds and this particular minutes. Then we need to create the variables for these all four buttons, and then we need to create a variable for the lap list. So let's start by doing it. So first here I will be using the const, and inside of that I'm going to name it as minutes label. It's actually equal to document dot get element by id, because we have specified the id as minutes. So here I will be using the IDs. So if I come back to the index.html, so I'm going to copy the minutes ID and I'm going to paste it here. Then I'm going to duplicate it to 2 more times, and here I'm going to change it to seconds label. Okay, and inside of that I will be copying the name of the seconds and I will be pasting the name here seconds. Then I will be here using the milliseconds label, and instead of that again I'm going to copy the name milliseconds and pasting the name here. Okay, so we have now created the first three variables, which is for the minutes, seconds and milliseconds. Okay, and then we need to create the variables for the buttons. So the first one is for the start button. This is actually equal to document dot get element by id, and then we need to provide the code for the button. So the ID of the button is actually the start btn. Copy it and I'm going to paste it here. Then I'm going to duplicate this line of code 3 more times. Here I will be using this one for the stop, and this one is for the pause, and this one for the reset. Now it's time to copy the ID names, which is the stop btn. Then this one is for the pause btn, and this one is for the reset btn. Control save it. Now we actually created the variables for the buttons. Next we need to create the variable for our lap list. So lap list is actually equal to document dot get element by id. Inside of that we need to place the id name, which is the lap list. So this is the id name. Inside of the ul we need to update this particular unordered list. So we have now created the elements variable. Okay, so the next step is we need to create the stopwatch variables. Okay, so these are the variables that we need to create. So the first variable is actually we need to create for the minutes. Now I am actually using here a let, because the value of these variables will be updated many times. So that is the reason, because once we create the constants, we actually can't update its value many times. To update the value multiple times, we need to use here a let. So the another variable, which is actually for the milliseconds, and it's actually also going to be 0, and then we want a variable which is for the interval. Okay, so I'm not going to initialize any default value to this interval variable. Then we need to set the listener to these all four buttons, so that when we click on it, we want to perform a corresponding callback, means the function. So here again I will be using the start btn, means the start button, which is the variable name. Then we need to add the listener. So we want to listen to the click listener, and then we need to provide here a start timer. Okay, and then we need to terminate that code. So I'm going to duplicate it into 3 more times, and here I will be using the stop. Then I will be here using the pause, and this one is for the reset. Then this one is for the stop timer, then this one is for the pause timer, and this one is for the reset timer. Okay, so we have now created all the four functions, and we have set the listeners to these particular functions, and then it's time to create all of these particular functions. So here at the bottom I'm going to create all the functions here. So the first function is actually the start function. So here I need to use the function keyword, then the start timer, which is the name of the function. Then we need to create another function, which is the stop timer. This is then the name of the function. Then we need to start its body. Then we need to create another function which is the pause timer. Then we need to start its body. Then we need to create another function. Now this particular function is for the reset. It's a timer. Then we need to start its body. Okay. So the first thing is, before starting the code inside of these functions, first we need to actually create the function to update the timer. Alright. So here at the end of this reset timer, here I will be creating another function which is for the update timer. Then to start its body, inside of that, first I will be here using the milliseconds variable. Whenever we update the timer, we want to update the value of the milliseconds. So here we are going to write the logic. If milliseconds is actually equals to 100, then we want to actually change the milliseconds value to again 0. Alright, and we want to update the value of the seconds. Now here, because inside of the 1 second we have 1000 milliseconds, but we want to execute our stopwatch timer more fast, so that is the reason I have used here 100. But if you are developing a real world application, means if you are developing this in a real project, although it is a real application and in actually used in the real world, but if you are submitting this project in your colleges or school, or maybe you are actually doing it as for your assignment, then make sure you use here 1000 value, because it's actually 1 second is actually equal to 1000 milliseconds. Okay, so in 1 second you have 1000 milliseconds. But in order to actually execute the code more quickly, means the clock stopwatch timer code more quickly, that is the reason I have actually used here a 100 value. Alright, so that is what actually I want to explain. Now after that, again we need to check the condition. So if seconds actually equals to 60, because in 1 minute we have 60 seconds, so we want to change the seconds value to 0, initialize the seconds value to 0, and then we want to start updating the value of the minutes. Alright, so this is the particular code we want to execute. Now after the end of this particular if statement, we need to call here another function which is the display timer function. So here again I am going to call the display timer. So this function we need to call, and we need to create this display timer function. So here at the bottom of the update timer, we need to create the display timer function that is actually responsible for the value updation inside these particular labels. So remember, at the top we have created the variables for these particular 3 labels. So we are going to update the value of these 3 labels inside this particular display timer function. So the first thing is, we need to actually update the milliseconds value. So milliseconds label dot text content, we want to update its text content equals to milliseconds. Okay, and then I will be here using the value called seconds label dot text content is equal to seconds. Okay, and after that we need to update its minutes label text content to actually minutes, the value that we are actually updating inside the update timer. But at this point of time, if I control save it and if I click on the start, stop, pause, reset, nothing will happen. That is because on click of the start button, we are actually calling this start timer function. But inside of this start timer function, we need to actually call the update timer function. Okay, so inside of that, we need to here call the update timer function. So I'm going to call this update timer function. Also, whenever we click on this particular start btn, we want to actually disable this, because once we click on it, we don't want to again start the timer on click of that button. So for that reason, we have to here use the start btn, which is the start button, dot disabled, which is a CSS property. So we have to write the whole property. Disabled is equal to true. If I control save it and if I click here, then you can see when I click on the button, it's actually going to update the value. But again, now it's actually just displaying the one value and also this 0, 0. Our code is working. If I click on it here, then it's going to display only a one value. This is because we need to here use the concept of the interval. So we need to use this let interval variable here. So we are actually going to use here the interval variable actually equals to, and we need to pass this update timer inside this set interval function, which is a JavaScript function. And inside of that we need to pass the update interval, and then we need to specify remove this function brackets. We need to pass as a callback, and here we need to pass the delay of the time. So I'm going to use here 10 because I want to execute the timer more quickly. If I control save it, if I click on it, now you can see the timer value is actually start updating with the use of this set interval method, or I can say that is a function, because right now we are not using the object oriented programming. Now if I again refresh it and if I click on the start, right now you can see it's actually showing this single digit, whereas in the final version of the application we are actually seeing it a 2-digit value, no matter if the value of the second is actually a single digit value. To actually use this particular concept, we need to actually use here a pad function, means we need to actually use to format the string in a 2-digit way. So for that, instead of the display timer, we need to pass another utility function. We need to create the utility function, or you can say that the another function which will actually use to format the time in a 2-digit value. So here I will be creating the function, then we need to create here a pad time, and inside of that we will be pass the time. So this function is going to accept a parameter time, which is either in seconds, minutes or milliseconds. So this is going to return, and inside of that we will be using the time dot toString, because we want to actually format it to string. Alright, and then we need to actually pad it with the use of pad start function. And then what we want to pad, so we want to actually create a 2-digit value, right, 2-digit value, and then we want to pad it with the value that will be in a form of string. So we need to provide here a string value. Now we need to use this function. So whenever we actually displaying the time, we want to display the time in a formatted way. So this milliseconds will be passed to this pad time function, and also this seconds pad time. Instead of that I will be passing these seconds, and then inside of this pad time again we need to pass the minutes. Alright, now if I control save it and now if I click on the start button, there is a problem. So the problem is here, it is not working because here I had made a typo. It is actually a string, so it is like to string. If I control save it, if I click on it, now you can see everything is working fine, and you can see now the value is actually in a form of 2-digit. You can see here right now, no matter if it is a single value, it is actually preceded with a 0, and if it is already a 2-digit value, then this particular 0 will be ignored. So with the use of this pad start function, we have actually formatted the time. So I'm going to explain this pad start function little bit more because this may be new to you guys. So this pad start function will take 2 arguments. The first is the target length of the value. Just like I already explained, we want to display a 2-digit value. So that is the reason I have here used the toLength. Means the toLength value we want to display, which is like this toLength value. And then we want to pad it with that particular string value. So padding string means the second argument that it will accept is a padding string. So we want to append this particular 0 whenever there is a single string, which is like in case if I just simply refresh it, if I start it, right now you can see it is actually a single value. So if it is that condition, we want to actually proceed as 0. Alright, so I hope you get the idea of the pad function. So once we actually get the display of the function, means we are actually able to display the timer inside the 2-digit value. Alright, next whenever we click on the pause, we want to pause that timer in that particular time. We want to pause the time, in short I want to say. Okay, so to pause the timer, we need to use the clear interval function. So instead of that pause timer function, here I will be calling the clear interval function. Instead of that, we need to pass the interval value. After specifying the interval variable value, which is at the top, you can see this is the value variable, because once we call the set interval function, the whatever value that this set interval function provide, it's going to initialize in this particular interval. Okay, so that value will be saved inside this interval. So we want to just simply use that clear interval so that we can pause the timer, and after that we want to disable this pause button just like the start button, so that we again don't click on this button. Okay, so I'm going to copy here this particular lines of the code from here and changing this one to pause button. Okay, and just here 2 times button, first remove it, I control save it, and now if I click on the start and if I click on pause, you can see now the timer is paused. So our pause button functionality for the stopwatch timer is also working. Next, we need to actually create the reset timer functionality. So whenever we click on the reset, we want to actually update these values to 0. So for that, we need to create the function which is the reset timer. So here I will be using the reset timer data function. We want to create the reset timer data. So this will be the reset timer data function, and inside of that we need to update the value which is the minutes is equal to 0, and then we need to create here a seconds which is actually equal to 0, and then we need to create here a milliseconds. Then again we need to set the value of the variable to 0. So whenever we click on this reset, we want to call this reset timer data function, and then we want to just simply click on the display timer, update the 0 values to the UI as well. Okay, so once we done with the code of the reset timer data, it's time to call this reset timer data function inside the reset timer. So we need to call here reset timer. So first we need to clear the interval. Okay, so first here we need to create the interval, means clear the interval, and after that we need to call the reset timer data function. Okay, and after that once we click on the reset timer data function, then here we also want to actually click on the reset timer data, because once we click on the reset timer button, we don't want to again click on this reset timer button. Okay, so again here we will be using the reset timer dot disable is equal to true. Okay, so if I click on save, and now if I click on the start button and if I click on the reset, you can see now the values of all these 3 labels is actually set to 0. If I click on start again, right now you can see it's actually not starting. If I refresh, it's actually updating, and if I click on the reset, it is not actually updating. Okay, so the thing is that once we click on the start button, then this button is actually in a disabled state. So it doesn't matter if I click on this button many times, it is not going to display. So the problem is that inside this reset timer function, here we need to actually make the start button disabled to false, because we want to make the start button active. So here I have actually typed the wrong button code. We need to here use the start button, and we need to actually set its disable value to false, because we want to make active. Once we click on the reset one, we want to make the start button to be active again. Okay, so if I refresh it and if I click on the start and if I click on the reset, you can see now the timer is set to 0 again. If I click on start, now you can see it's again started. Similarly, in case of the pause, whenever we click on the start and if I click on pause, right now if I again click on the start, it's not going to start the timer. So again we need to make the start button active. So instead of that, we need to actually use it. So I actually made a problem inside the code. Now it's solved. So if I click on the start, if I click on pause, and if I click on again start, so it's going to start the timer wherever it is actually paused. So our three functionalities are actually working properly fine. Now we need to actually start the code inside this stop timer function. So this one is actually little tricky because inside of that, whenever we click on it, we want to also save the lap time inside this lap list, just like in the final version of the application. If I click on start and if I click on stop, you can see now it's actually saved here. So we want to add this functionality. Okay, so coming back to the our version of the application, and inside of the stop timer, the first thing is we need to first clear the interval, which is obvious required. We want to clear the interval by calling the clear interval and passing the interval variable as a parameter. Then here we need to call the reset timer data because we also need to reset the timer to 0 once we save a level. And then again we need to make the button to its actually in a false state, because once we click on the stop timer, we want to make the start buttons to false again, means we want to make the start button to be active again. So here we need to call the false. Okay, so we have done with the three steps. Then we need to here call the a function which is add to lap list function. So this function we need to create. So at the bottom here I am going to create this function which is add lap list. So this will be the function responsible for the creation of the lap list. Okay, so here we are going to create the lap list function. So the first thing is we need to create some variables. So the first variable is the lap time. So this is actually equals to, so here I will be using the template string, which is a key present at the top of your caps lock and at the bottom of your escape key. So this is the template string character. Inside of that, first I will be using the dollar symbol and then the pair of curly brackets and the variable value that I want to display here, which is the minutes. And then we need to actually here use the colon because we also want to display the seconds. Then again I will be here using the dollar, then the pair of curly brackets, and here I will be using the pad time also because we want to display the time in a form of 2-digit value. So that is the reason I will be here using the pad time again. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see the code more clearly, and also I'm going to use the view and word wrap. Okay, so again here we need to use the pad time, and inside of that we need to pass the seconds. Then after that we need to here specify the colon. Then now make sure it is actually, yes, we need to specify the colon because it is a string. Then we need to use the dollar symbol, then the pair of curly brackets. Again we need to use here a pad time, and then we need to pass the value which is milliseconds. Okay, so that is what we have done with the template string for the lap time. Then we need to create the variable for the const list, which is the list item. Okay, again I am going to use here a template string. Inside of that I will be using the span tag. So here it is a span tag. Okay, this is the span tag, and then here I will be using the lap because the string that I want to display, then the dollar symbol, then the curly brackets, and the value that I want to display, which is the lap list. The variable that we have created at the top, remember the variable that is this one, lap list variable. So we are actually using this variable here, which is the lap list dot child. So we want to actually child element count because it is actually a list. So that is the reason we are going to use here a child element count, and then we need to plus 1. Okay, and then we need to actually here use the column. Then we need to close the span tag, and after that closing the span tag, make sure you are inside the template string. Okay, and then we need to use the dollar symbol, then the pair of curly brackets, and then we want to display the lap time, which is this particular variable value. Alright, and after that we need to here use the list item dot inner HTML because we want to update its inner HTML. List item, which is my inner HTML is equal to, so here I have actually made one mistake. This particular line of the code will be initialized here, and instead of that list item we want to create the document dot create element, because we want to create the list element. Then inside of that list element we want to add the value. Alright, we want to create the li tag under this list item variable. Okay, and inside of this list item we want to update its inner HTML with this particular line of the code, which is to actually initialize the lap time. And after that we want to add this, means we want to add as a child. So lap time, which is the lap list, lap list dot add, I can say that is append child. Inside of that we want to pass the list item. If I control save it, then it's going to do nothing because we have nothing added here. Also coming over to index.html, I'm going to remove this code from here. Save it. Okay, so now you can see the UL code is also removed. Coming back to the script.js, once we add this add to lap list, we need to call this function. So we need to call this function inside the stop timer, which we already did here. Like here we already called. So now it's time to check whether this is actually working or not. So if I click on the start and if I click on stop, you can see now the lap time is actually added inside the lap list. If I again click on the start and if I click on the stop, you can see again this lap time is added as a second lap to this particular list. So the reason for adding here a +1, so that we can increase this particular value, which is actually indicating that it is a lap 2. Okay, so now we have done with the all code for this particular stopwatch timer application. I tried my best to explain the concept. Some of the things may be new to you, so make sure you actually Google it if you find anything problematic, because it is the best way to learn the things more quickly and learn the things more perfect way. And if you face still problem, then you can use the Q&A section. I will definitely love to help you with your queries. But make sure whenever you are actually asking a question, if you're facing the issues in this particular stop timer code, then make sure you actually explain that you are developing a stopwatch timer application, and then pick a screenshot of this particular code and then send it in the Q&A section. And you can even send your query to my social media. Mostly I am active on the Facebook, so you can ask the question directly on my Facebook. Okay, because it is hard if you are just simply saying I am facing the issue on click of a button on the stop button, so I am getting nothing, because what problem you are facing. Maybe you made any typo, but try to give more code so that I can help you with the Q&A section. Okay, so that marks the completion of the code for this entire project. If you like this module, then please leave a review so that this review can help me to reach more students. Also, it will motivate me to create more awesome courses like this. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you very much.